Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. As many of you know, I was asked to do a series of episodes around grief and death and related topics. So in that vein, today I'm bringing you a conversation with Katie Joy Duke. Katie is an author, a mindset coach, transformational speaker, and mother of 2 daughters, one living and one in spirit. Katie practiced social justice law for 9 years before having a full-term stillborn birth of her first daughter, Poppy. Motivated to heal from her devastating loss, she left her legal career in 2016 and spent 6 years writing her best-selling memoir, Still Breathing: My Journey with Love, Loss, and Reinvention, which was published in May of 2022. I wish I could end Katie's bio on a high note, but only days after submitting her final manuscript to her copy editor, Katie got her first mammogram. And at the tender age of 41, Katie was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. She completed 5 months of chemotherapy in August and has a long road of treatment ahead of her, but she's here with us today and she has a lot to share. So first, let me say thank you. I'm so sorry you went through all of that and are still going through that, but I'm really glad you're here with us and can teach us some things. Katie, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne. I'm so excited for this conversation. And yes, I have officially declared myself a survivor. I am getting through this, and I have so much to say on behalf of all of us out there who are dealing with cancer. It's really changed my life in the same way that pregnancy loss did. I keep learning and growing and sharing with everyone that I can.
And that's the best part, right? You're sharing and those lessons, I strongly believe, will help other people who are going through similar things. So let's break it down. We'll kind of break this into 2 segments, but let's kind of take a step back. You're living a life that probably on the books would look wonderful, right? You're a successful lawyer. You're a newlywed. You are enjoying the idea of this pregnancy and where that's going. And then boom, the tablecloth or the rug gets pulled out from under you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, take us back there for a minute and kind of set the stage, because that really is the start, right, of this chapter of your life. And how did that unwind?
Sure. So my husband and I had been married for about 6 months when I went into labor. You know, I'm as sure some of your audience will end up reading my book. And so it's not a spoiler alert to tell you that we were engaged one day and found out that we were pregnant the next. So a beautiful unfolding of events, and certainly romantic. And my husband was very proud of himself for popping the question just in time. We had a beautiful pregnancy, and I went into labor on Poppy's due date, which was October 25th of 2015. And we were given the green light to go into the hospital the following morning at the crack of dawn. You know, at that point, we were just incredibly ready and excited and anticipating childbirth and everything that comes with that, and then taking our baby home. And it was within a few minutes, really, of getting settled in the hospital suite with our nurse and midwife to find out that Poppy no longer had a heartbeat.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been almost 7 years, and I've done so much healing work that I can typically speak about, you know, sort of the factual, you know, the unfolding in a way that for many years I couldn't. You know, there were a lot of tears involved. And just on that note, it's interesting. I find what will elicit emotion, or I will find a new place of tenderness in my heart, will sometimes be in recalling a conversation I had with someone, or a moment at the grocery store when I saw a mother pushing her child, or, it's interesting how like the main event of Poppy dying doesn't so much bring out the sadness in me anymore, but it's those tender moments of longing and nostalgia and perhaps what could have been, or now meeting a young child who's turning 7 in a month and going, oh, wow, my daughter would
Mm.
be, like you, this little human that's turning 7 would, represents where my daughter would be in her journey as a living human. But anyway, to take you back sort of to that hospital experience, I ended up giving birth to Poppy later that day. I ended up having all sorts of help, interventions medically that I had not anticipated, but I really was having a hard time. I mean, my body was the trauma, the onset of shaking and spiraling thoughts and sort of just uncontrollable sadness at that point. But did end up giving birth to Poppy. It felt very sacred, very honorable. We got to hold Poppy, and Eli got to cut her umbilical cord, and we took her footprints and we weighed her and measured her and held her and took pictures with her. And it was very devastating. And it's interesting even now that I've published my memoir about it. And, I have that story written. That's chapter 6 and chapter 7 and chapter 8, when we're there in the hospital and all of this is unfolding. I can now look back and read those chapters, and objectively, I'll just be like, oh my gosh, this woman, like, oh, like, oh, what she went through. And then it's like, wait a second, Katie, that's you. That's your baby that you left in that hospital room. Those are your decisions. That's the shower that you took after she died, and you never wanted to get out of the shower, and you had no idea how you would ever move on
Yeah.
from such a travesty. But I have. Yeah, and I'm here to share that story, because there are so many women who go through losses like mine, whether it's a late term stillbirth or even miscarriages. There's so many different ways. And I've learned that really your experience of grief has less to do with the length of a pregnancy and more the amount of expectation that you had.
How did you reframe your thoughts around those expectations and what you had, and knowing that that wasn't going to be your reality in the future? How did you shift that?
Well, it didn't happen immediately for sure. I mean, I was a complete wreck for quite some time. And also, I mean, there was so much happening in ways that I was almost immediately receiving signs from both my intuition and from external powers and Poppy's spirit, divinity, source, God. There were so many things, magical sort of things that were happening that I started tuning into very quickly. Even the night that I got home from the hospital, I had a very powerful dream that I write about in my book that ended up really guiding me to this idea that something would come out of this, that I would rise from this travesty. So I balanced sort of the belief that something would come out of this with just the pure devastation of having given birth to a dead baby, having both, my body having created this life and nurtured this soul within me for those 9 months, and then to have her depart, and for my womb to have become a tomb to hold both life and death. So, now that I very confidently identify myself as a writer, a lot of writers struggle with, am I really a writer? What makes me a writer? I haven't published anything yet that I'm not a writer, right? But I am definitely a writer. I'm both an author, but I'm also just a writer. Like, I process through word, and I allowed myself to immediately begin writing down my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams, my hopes, my devastation, my love, all of it. And from that, the story started to really unfold. And that was how I really began to move through. But it was really messy. It was really ugly. It
Life is messy.
yes. And the book is a beautiful presentation of everything I went through, and with all of the periods and the I's and the dots and the T's, it's all in the right place. But the process was extremely messy. I think
Yeah.
I even mentioned that in the intro of my book. Like, grief is messy. It just is.
Yeah. How can it not be, right? It's this big ball of emotions that are all kind of jumbled together, and you can kind of get any emotion at any time.
Yes.
Of course, it's messy. It's hard to unwind all that. I was going to read this a little bit later on, but what you were talking about really made me want to read it right now. And it's a passage from the book. How is it possible that a heart can love so deeply a life that is no longer here, a life that never fully got to be here? I sit alone with my thoughts, and then it comes to me. Another answer to prayer. Maybe she was fully here for her purpose. Maybe she completed her soul's mission. That passage touched my soul, I have to tell you, in so many ways. To find a perspective that would somehow make it be almost okay that perhaps Poppy came and Poppy delivered on her purpose. To be able to get to that perspective while going through so much pain, it baffles my mind. Similarly, you've managed to flip the script, take another perspective, whatever you want to call it, around some of these phrases. And I'm going to ask you to talk on each one of them. But it's a similar thing. Like you're looking at the positive side of what could be a very negative. So you say you choose love over fear. And so how do you bring yourself, and how did you get so wise to know that you needed to choose love over fear?
Experience. I think, being present to my life and the outcome of, fear and anxiety, and living in a state where my thoughts overtake reality. That's like living in a cage. And the world is, life is just so beautiful. I mean, I went live on Instagram yesterday afternoon from my backyard, and I was philosophizing, which I like to do that live because it just makes me be, I'm just like, I don't know if anybody's going to watch this, but I'm being real. Like, here, it's not scripted, I promise. But I was sort of philosophizing about just the mystical nature of all of this, the fact that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. I know we're chatting about my experience with pregnancy loss and Poppy, but specifically now, this idea of choosing love over fear has immediately translated into my experience with cancer treatment and my own mortality. And I have had to come to terms with not only my daughter dying and the reality, the possibility that in fact it was her soul's purpose and mission to be held perfectly by me and to be loved perfectly by me and my husband, and then to move on to something else. Maybe it was for nirvana. Maybe it was her soul's final incarnation. Maybe she needed to go off and do something else. Maybe that was her soul's contract, and she knew that it was going to be hard for me. But in the same way that, like, I'm not responsible for some other soul's outcome, she wasn't really responsible for mine either. So I had a choice, and I could choose to live wrapped up in the sadness and the fear and the anxiety of what could have been the past, or I could choose to live into the future and to be present. And I believe that that's what Poppy would want. And I think that's what God wants for us. I think that's what divinity and spirit wants for us, is to find love, even when we are afraid. And actually, just recently, I learned that there are two Hebrew words in the Old Testament. And I'm not a religious person, but this is from the book Playing Big by Tara Moore. And she's great, but this is a wonderful book, but I won't go too much into it. But there are two different words for fear in the Hebrew Bible. One is, and I might not pronounce these correctly, pahad, Pachad, and the other is hira, Y-I-R-A-H. And the first fear, pachad, is the overreactive, irrational fear that stems from worries about what could happen, about the worst case scenario we imagine. And the other, yira, has three different meanings. It is the feeling that overcomes us when we inhabit a larger space than we are used to. It is the feeling we experience when we suddenly come into possession of considerably more energy than we had before. And it is what we feel in the presence of the divine. And so reading that just made me go, oh, okay. So yeah. So now I notice like when I'm like, yeah, I'm becoming a transformational speaker and it's so scary. And I think, oh, what is that? What is that fear? Right?
Mm.
Oh, it's the fear of like, oh, I'm so excited about it. See, I've got all this energy. I'm like, ooh, I'm like full. I'm like got chill bumps all over me. Like I'm declaring I'm going to do something. Right. And it's that fear of like in the divine, like I believe this is a gift that I've been given that I can use to help motivate, inspire, and transform other lives. Right. So it's like this interesting, different kind of fear. So anyway, that's a side note and you might end up editing that out.
I won't edit it out because I think it adds insight and it adds value in that I think naming something, being able to name it and then start, we often talk about lots of things that we're going through and lots of things when you're trying to change habits or get rid of limiting beliefs or any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is noticing it,
Yes.
understanding it, taking a pause, right? And then you can figure out how to move through it or with it, right? And so it makes me think of that because once you've given it a name,
Yeah.
so you can say, oh, that's that. I can't even recall the
Yeah.
words.
Pachad, I think it's, and then Yira, Y-I-R-A-H. Yeah.
But yeah, right? So you're giving it a name
yeah.
so you can kind of call it in and just that then lets you say, I'm not giving that any time of day because I know what this is.
Exactly. And then the alternative, which is like, oh yeah, this is the fear that is me playing bigger, that is me opening myself up, that is me, it's that vulnerability that's like, what if I fail? Like, what if I do it imperfectly? Right. You're like, but I gotta do it. I'm just gonna try. Right. Like that is so inspiring to me now, especially with going back to this idea of my own mortality, facing my own mortality. And one of the things that I can say about this cancer journey and my experience with it is that I have absolutely lost the fear of death. I'm not afraid to die. I don't want to die anytime soon. I love being here. I've got a little girl who will almost be 5 years old, and I want to see her grow up and spend I just love her so much. I want to see her grow and I want to continue to nurture her and see what she does in this world. And I have so much more I want to do in this world. And I think that I know I have a beautiful story that's worth sharing and that people are listening. But I also have realized that, and I know you've read the book, but Poppy passed on to something else. And my dad, who I write about in my book as well, who passed away, he passed on to something else. And when my father died, and I was telling my husband, I called him to say, Daddy died, like it happened. And my husband had this overwhelming like moment where he said, Katie, I can see them together. And I was just like, what? What are you talking about? Like who can you see together? And he just said, Poppy was there waiting for your daddy. She was there to meet him. Eli and I are not religious people. And so it was just, I was like I was so, but I went with it because I was just like, okay, like, I like that idea. I really like the idea that they're together. And of course, it's not an uncommon idea, but it's very comforting. And then when I had to face my own mortality this past year, as I've been facing the reality that cancer can just take your life so quickly, I've had to realize, and I have that, oh my gosh, wait a second. If Poppy went on to something more amazing and magical, and my daddy went on to something amazing and more magical, and they got to be together, that means that when I die, I get to go on to something more amazing and magical. And it's possible that I get in that soul amazing way, get to be reunited with them. Oh, and then I was like, okay. So with this time that I have left, it's like, use me, let's work some magic. Let's let's share joy. Let's be honest. Let's be vulnerable. Let's talk about all the things that hurt and all the things that are so meaningful.
You made me think of, so we're reading A Year to Live by Stephen Levine. I always say it wrong. And it talks in there about, it's all about living, a year as if it was your last year.
Mm.
And, making peace with your past and giving gratitude for all the things you had. But there's a chapter in there, of course, about death and about how most people are hung up in the fear of dying, not death itself, but it's that fear of, right? And so when you were talking about that, I was just thinking, you're in such a, it's going to sound odd to say that you're in such a great place, but your headspace is so good in that you're at a place where you have peace with it. And it ties into the next phrase I wanted to ask you about, which is choose acceptance over resistance, which is, this is it, right? I mean, you've made comfort around all these things and you're accepting that what will be, will be.
Yes. Poppy. And I have a real relationship with her in spirit. And it's something that I've been nurturing now for almost 7 years, since she died. And of course, before then too, when she was living within me, but she has taught me how to accept what is. And again, that didn't come overnight. It wasn't easy. It was very messy and complicated. But I have found, sometimes I journal a lot, and I have found journal entries. Recently I opened up a journal entry and I saw something where I had written down, resistance is the calcification. And I was like, what? Like I just thought, like, what did that mean when I wrote that down? Like, did I say that? Was that something that someone said that I thought was cool? Like, I don't even remember. But then I look at it in the journal and I'm like, resistance is the calcification. Resistance is the constriction, right? Like if we think about like our heart opening up to something, like let's think about like, and I've practiced yoga for over 20 years now. And so if you think about like, you're doing a heart opening exercise, right? You're opening your heart to receive. You're opening up to allow the love to come in, and your heart chakra is that's what that is. It's all about receiving. It's about love. And so when we think about how many of us actually operate in the world, it's very constricted. Like even physically, our shoulders are hunched forward. We're protecting ourselves. We're protecting our heart because we've all been wounded so many times that a lot of us end up calcifying, right? We get hardened. And that is, I think, part of the resistance of resisting what is, resisting what was, and eventually shutting down. And so for me, part of that acceptance, and again, also oddly enough, very tied now to my own experience with cancer, is that my cancer has metastasized, and it metastasized from my breast into my lymph nodes, and then it made it out of my lymph nodes and into my sternum. So the cancer is in the bone over my heart. And spiritually, for me, that was a message. I received it as a message. I received it as a messenger and as a lesson, as an assignment. And I was just like, whoa, like as much healing as I have done, I think that the cancer was there for a reason, that it metastasized in that bone, because that is the bone that has been protecting my heart. And for me, it was just like this next level of spiritual healing that I have done now in the last 6 months, where I have just really loosened the roots and the vines and the grip around my heart and all the things that have happened to me. And I'm really shifting my thinking around life happening for me. So how are these things happening for me? And again, these are not my original thoughts, right? Like but I really am using them, and I'm really applying them in a way that I think I'm a living example of someone who has really hard things happen to them and then uses those things finds the meaning, makes the meaning. I am a big proponent, and I recently gave a talk about this, is that in this idea of making meaning out of the things that happen to us and finding how they can happen for us and then allowing them to move through us. Because I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. I think that that's way too generic and sort of trite to say. But I do think that we get to decide why things happen. I think it's much more of an empowering, right? Because if you're like, oh, everything happens for a reason, you're like, I don't know what that reason is, but I guess, you're just like, well, okay, that doesn't sound like, but to say like, this really challenging thing happened to me, and here's what I've done with it.
Mm.
Here are the lives of the people I've touched because I shared it. Here's how I helped someone else avoid it. Here, all of those, the meaning that we can make of the things that happen to us. So all of that is to say that I am even now, more than when I authentically wrote that in my book, I have even unwound more of that calcification, and it's now that I'm saying it, actually cancer and is actually like in the milk ducts of my breast. It is a calcification. So it's interesting because I'm so philosophical in my little brain, I just like the way that I think through things and find the connections and the synchronicities. But the more that we can just allow and accept instead of pushing against what is, the more freedom and flow and joy we're going to be able to allow in our life while we're also grieving.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Right. So that's important, right? That's been a consistent theme throughout all these segments, is that grief doesn't end.
Mm.
Life just gets bigger around it. You create a different version of life, and the grief is always going to still be there. And that's it. And, right? And what else? And the rest of your life continues. And you'll do new things, and you'll have new loves, and you'll probably have more griefs. But it does stay there. You just have to rebuild around it. That's a consistent message.
100%. I think, and I know you and I talked about this when we were first connecting about a month ago, but I talked about grief as a frequency, and the idea that before Poppy died, I had losses. And of course, people around me had their own losses, but I had never experienced that type of grief before. But once I tuned into it, like a radio frequency, once I like that dial got turned to like, oh, grief, you're on the grief channel. I became so much more aware of it, in the same way that like there are waves all around us. Like, do we really question where our Wi-Fi comes from? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's there. Like, it's, it's just like this signal, right? So like the grief is a signal. And I think if we give ourselves permission to tap into it, it actually makes life make a whole lot more sense. Because you talked about at the beginning of our conversation, this idea of naming a thing. Like sometimes I will just be so out of it. I will be irritable. I will be grumpy. I will be sharp and curt. I mean, all the things at the people I love the most. And then at some point, in that day, I'll just be like, what is going on with me? Like, what is, and then I'm like, oh, it's grief. It's grief. Oh yeah. I'm actually just really sad about the thing.
Yeah.
It's just grief. And then once I name it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's grief. I'm actually it's a really griefy day. Like and then I can go to my husband and say, I'm so sorry. I was so irritable and short with you. I realize I'm carrying around all this sadness about X, Y, and Z, or, and then it's like, and then he's like, well, thanks for acknowledging that. Like you were really short at me earlier, but I totally get it.
Yeah. You can give yourself some grace then.
So much.
Right? And by the way, I love it's a really griefy day. I might have to steal that.
Do it.
But I think it's an important message, because it does come in waves, right? And it can hit you out of the blue. And
sure can.
Right? I'm sure, I mean, you know better than I. But to be able to name it, recognize it, and then cut yourself some slack.
Yes.
Right? you're entitled to have a crappy
So
day.
much grace. That is one thing I have learned how to give myself. And I think too, to be able to model that, to be able to model what it looks like to give oneself grace. It's really easy to say to somebody else, "Oh, give yourself some grace." And you're like, "Well, can I pick it up at Target? Like, where do you go get grace?" Like, are you kidding me? Like, is it at the drive-through? Like, can I get that with my venti Starbucks? Like, I don't know. Where do you get this grace, right? It's such an inside thing, like the cultivation of grace. And I've done a lot of self-compassion work. There are some really incredible teachers out there. Tara Brock is one of them. Kristen Neff is another amazing self-compassion teacher. But I've done a lot of work on how to offer myself grace when I am suffering. I think so many of us are like, we see a friend that is suffering and we can pick up the phone or we can reach out and lend a hand or we can say, it's okay. It's okay for you to feel all these feelings. But then when it happens to us, a lot of us are like getting out the whip and lashing our own back, or we're saying,
Yeah.
God, get over it. Or like, what's wrong with you? Or like, wow, like we get all like angsty with ourselves when we also deserve that same amount of compassion. And it is a practice. It is something to be able to acknowledge, like, this is a moment of suffering. Ah, yes, I am suffering. I'm noticing this suffering. Where do I feel it in my body? Is it in my heart? Is it in my forehead? Is it in the back of my neck? Is it in my low back? Is it, where is it? And how can I just acknowledge that it's there? And then do whatever it is, the breathing, the movement, the warm cup of tea, something that's comforting and nurturing for you to move through.
I like that you said it's a practice because you've sort of alluded to that on several of these topics. Choosing acceptance, that's a practice. Choosing to look forward, that's a practice instead of getting hung up in the shoulda, coulda, woulda, which we all know how those merry-go-rounds go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Identifying the lesson that you can take from something and figuring out how to apply it and use it to give in a giving way. I mean, those are all practices that, to your point, none of it came easy. So this was a messy go round and you've landed in this really special place.
Mm-hmm.
But and putting all these things to practice, I think it's important for other people to hear because you do have to give yourself grace. It's not going to come easy.
Mm-mm.
And you're probably going to get it wrong a lot of times until you start getting it right more.
Well, and the thing is that, and and even just the right wrong context is like, I don't even really think that you can get it wrong if you're trying. I mean,
You get better.
I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I try so much to notice if I'm actually holding myself back from something because I don't think it's good enough, because I've carried that story around for a long time. And it's, it's just like at some point, Katie, it's like, what are you you got to give it up, girl. Like it's, and people are like, oh, there's no such thing as perfect. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. But that doesn't mean that you know what I mean? Well, I don't know what that means. I get it. But, yeah, I mean, it's, the practice is the remembering, right? Like, this is what I actually wanted to say about it. For a long time in my life, I had this idea that these big things like grief and loss and trauma could just be like a checklist. And I could be like, okay, done. Like, check. Okay, I've had enough trauma. Done. Like, I've had enough loss. Done. I've had enough grief. Done. Except that you don't get to cross that stuff off the list, right? It's got like, that's the nature of this world. This is the nature of being human. This is the nature of, the Buddha said all life is suffering, right? Like, it's like, but are we going to add to it, right? Like, how much are we going to pile on top of the suffering that's unavoidable? And that's where we really have the choice. And that's where we can really say, that thing that someone said to me really hurt, but am I going to ruminate about it for 10 days? That's my choice.
Yeah.
That's where I have the power to say, nope, I'm not going to ruminate about that, like that, or I'm not going to take it personally, or that wasn't about me. Like that's their story. That's not me, or vice versa. If I hurt someone else, I'm going to apologize, or am I going to hold a grudge or be resentful or whatever? Like we have so many choices, and I am absolutely doing life wonderfully and perfectly over here. And I even sometimes think that like in some ways I can even be harder on myself because I have all these tools and I have all this training. I became a life coach in 2018. I started a coaching practice 4 years ago. So there are these times when I'm like, ugh, I should know better, right? But then you're like, but you're human.
Right.
Like you're human.
Right. And the voices never stop, right?
Correct.
You learn, you can understand them more and learn to control them more, put the muzzle on them when you need to, but they don't stop.
Yes.
Dr. Amy Johnson, which we talk about a lot, she teaches you that, right? The thoughts are going to always occur. So you have to learn to just let them pass on by. She
Yes.
uses an image of either the weather or the clouds. They
Yes.
just come in and they go out. Let them go out, but don't get stuck on them. That's where we get into trouble when we start ruminating on them, to your point.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So with this cancer diagnosis, this journey you're going through here, I know you wanted to touch on some of the lessons specifically learned out of that because you've been doing a lot of work to expand in so many ways, but I guess your knowledge around marrying the Eastern and Western medicine has really grown with the cancer diagnosis and learning to trust yourself more.
Mm-hmm.
Even beyond what you went through with Poppy,
Yes.
you're finding, again, a different level here. So share a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I am definitely learning to befriend my intuition in ways that I think in our culture, especially as women, it is trained out of us. And I am bucking that trend.
Mm.
And I am really getting in touch with that part of me that goes, something about this doesn't feel right. Or, gosh, I don't really like the way this person is responding to me. Like, I mean, I'm learning how to set boundaries in ways that I never had before. And it's interesting because in some regards, it's literally because I've been so fatigued or exhausted or beat up from the chemotherapy drugs that I was completely unable to tolerate whatever it was that life was throwing at me. And so the boundary was like, I didn't check my email for 10 days, which felt scary because it's like, whoa, what's going to happen? What if I miss a thing? What if like, what if an opportunity passes me by? Right. And also then allowing that, choosing to say, you know what? I will get to what I need to get to in due time. And so the part about my intuition has also been the ability to heal myself, like really, like you said, the marrying of Western medicine, which is, extremely scientific and well researched and the best available medicine. I actually had a beautiful conversation with my oncologist last Wednesday. And she said to me, Katie, I hope and pray that in 20 years, I'm sitting around a campfire with my grandchildren, and one of my grandchildren looks at me and goes, "You did what to people, Grandma?
Wow.
You did what to them?" And she says, "Yes, son, grandson, whatever, yes, I did. But that was the best that we had available at the time. That was all that we had available at the time." And she's like, and I was like, oh, I loved it. It meant so much to me for my oncologist to be like, I don't enjoy poisoning you, but it is the best I have available. It's not fun for me to see my client, my patients coming in here like completely hairless and beat up and, their spirits are just beat down and exhausted and that sort of thing. And so that really helped me kind of frame that the medicine that I have endured the last 5+ months and everything else that has to happen to me going forward is because that's the best available treatment that we currently have. And I am doing so much on my own. I have read over and over and over again how the power of a positive mindset. And I want to be kind of just as a disclaimer, like there is actually, there's like toxic positivity, right? Like it exists out there where you can say a million affirmations and none of it come true because it's like slapping a band-aid on top of like a festering wound. Like it's, there's a lot of work that has to be done in order for like an affirmation to work, for instance. It isn't like flipping a switch. They're very powerful. But I say all that just because I don't want it to sound that like, oh, it's okay. It's just cancer. Like, no biggie. Like, oh, whatever. Like, I got this. Like it's not that at all. Like it's such a deeply spiritual experience. It's for me to recognize that I have the ability within myself to envision a cancer-free life, to envision feeling free and fluid in my body, to envision my cells healing themselves, to envision my immune system doing the incredibly magical work that it does, to not feel as though I am at war with my body or that this cancer is in some ways like intentionally trying to destroy me. That reminds me of another conversation I had with my oncologist where I was really picking her brain. And I encourage anyone out there with cancer, pick your oncologist's brain. If your intuition wants you to, pick it. You know what I mean? But what she said to me at one point, she was like, Katie, she's like, cancer isn't sentient. And I looked at her and I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. She's like, it doesn't have feelings. It's not trying to destroy you. It's just a mutated cell that can't stop mutating. It is out of control. Like the cell itself cannot stop. It is malfunctioning, and I thought, oh, okay. And it just, again, it's about this perspective. It's about this mindset shift, this thinking of like, okay, well, I don't have to be so angry. I mean, there is a lot of anger. There's been plenty of angry. Don't get me wrong. I've had a lot of anger about this, but also I actually express the anger. I've expressed my anger. Like I actually go ahead and scream. I even had a neighbor come over one day to make sure everything was okay. and then she was so funny. She was like, Katie, when I'm that angry, I usually scream into a pillow. And I looked at her and I was like, Kathy, I needed someone to hear me. It was very intentional that I did not scream into a pillow. Like I needed someone to know that I was that angry. So anyway, it worked because she came over and held me while I cried on the kitchen floor. But yeah, so I don't want to blabber on forever.
I want to
go
interject something. So you said something about, you said a lot of things, but when you were thinking about yourself and your body and all that, it made me think of manifestation, right? Meditation,
yes,
positive thinking, all those things. I mean, we do know there's been so much research. You can pick up books everywhere. These things matter.
They do.
And when you look at I just started understanding more from like in India, like they strongly, meditation is like their primary healthcare. I mean, their method of staying healthy. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to me how they believe and they have seen healing through just meditation. And I say just meditation. But that's where it goes back to like trying to bring those things into our lives all the time, not just in these critical moments, right? Because we can do so much to affect our life and the condition of it. I also you made me think of a phrase that anyone that knows me from my last 25 years of my career will laugh when I say this out loud, but I have this phrase that I coined that people know me for, and it's pick the least bad decision.
Mm.
So oftentimes in business and work, projects go awry, whatever, you're trying to execute on something and everything doesn't all line up, right? And there's no good decisions left. Always just pick the least bad decision. You have to make a decision and you have to move forward. So pick the least bad decision. And that's what I heard in your message.
Yes,
There is no great decision when you get cancer and it's that far
correct.
progressed. So what's the least bad decision? How do I get
Yes.
out of it, right?
Yes, and I like that. I'm gonna use that going forward. I think I also recently someone said something to me about the idea of like most of us claim to be like wrapped up in confusion or whatever, and she just said most of us aren't confused. We just refuse to make a choice.
Yeah.
We just refuse to
Yeah.
choose. So she's like, make a choice and then move forward with that choice. Like just move forward because people get so stuck,
Yeah.
right? And then they spiral and they think, right. It's like, well,
Yes.
you're refusing to make a decision. And that indecision is causing the confusion. It's not that you're confused. It's vice versa, right? It's like, so, and I have been meditating for years and years. And my meditation practice was vital during my healing after Poppy died, and to connect with her in spirit. That was how I really called her in, was through my meditation practice and getting still. I've been working on something that I'm calling the 6 pillars of healing, and I want to incorporate into public speaking and probably into my next book. But one of those is really getting comfortable with stillness and silence. And there's so many ways, slowing down, rest. I think most of us are chronically unrested. It's just
Yeah.
the go, 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 go. And obviously the pandemic did a lot to help a lot of people realize how much they were going and just how much they needed to slow down. But on the side of meditation and slowing down and getting into that stillness, because I get most of my downloads from source, from God when I'm meditating. And many people probably have the same experience with prayer. But I have had incredible experiences since being diagnosed with cancer, doing quantum meditations, and truly connecting with that sense of my own ability to heal my body. And the reality is like, there are people who've had these radical remissions and they've, kind of been like sort of totally outside of the box in terms of treatment. I'm choosing to do all of it, but I also believe that the reason that I'm responding so well, like I had a normal MRI on September 6th. I don't know if I had a chance to tell you that, but I finished chemo on August 30th. And then a week later, I had an MRI, a breast MRI, and there was no evidence of cancer in my breast. No, my lymph nodes appeared normal, and the previously enhancing mass on my sternum could no longer be detected.
Congratulations. Bye. Take a moment. Take a moment,
Thank
right?
you. Yes. Yes. And I celebrated so hard. And here's the beautiful thing, Marianne, when I went in to get that MRI, I told the techs, I was like, there's no evidence. You're not gonna be able to find it. It's gone. It's gone. I knew it was gone. I knew in my heart and soul and my mind that it was gone. I had a dream. I actually had this amazing, talk about befriending your intuition, but I had this incredibly powerful dream earlier this summer. I had been really sick from the chemo. I was just, it was gross, but I was really asking my dreams to send me a message and give me signs. And I had the dream one night that I spit my cancer out into my bowl of oatmeal. And in my dream, I get my spoon and I fish the cancer out, and it looks hard and metallic. And I like toss it out, and I'm like, I don't need you anymore, because I didn't want to eat it, And so I wake up from this dream, and I woke up from the dream, and I was like, oh my God, the cancer is gone. I just had this, I looked around the room, and I was just like, I'm pretty sure the cancer is gone. Like, I was just like, I just had like this crazy knowing. And then within the week, I got a care package from a girlfriend, and in it was sweet. It had like an adult coloring book and some pencils and some face masks and whatever. And then there was this little muslin bag, and I looked inside of it. I was like, what's this? And it was a chunk of hematite. And hematite, yeah, I
My
saw
eyes.
for the listeners. Yeah. Marianne's eyeballs just got really big. It was a chunk of hematite, and I looked at it and I held it in my hand, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what my cancer looked like when I spit it out into my bowl of oatmeal. And so I texted my friend who sent it to me because I had put this dream on Facebook. I share everything. I'm an open book. And I said to Bryce, did you see the dream that I had? And she was like, I did see that about that dream. I was like, did you buy me this rock before or after I had the dream? And she said, I bought the rock for you before you had the dream.
Wow.
And then I read about it and I'm like sitting on this rock and she's like, should I send this rock to Katie? And I was like,
Wow.
yeah. So she sent me this rock. So then now I have an external representation. I'm holding
Yeah.
in my hand something that my intuition told me that then manifested in a dream that then I woke up feeling like the cancer was gone. So now I'm holding this rock in my hand and I have been carrying this rock with me everywhere. I keep it in my purse, but I hold it. I've done meditations with it on my heart. I didn't know anything about hematite before that, but I looked up hematite. It's grounding, but it also has this magnetic quality. And so it's, as many rocks and crystals, right? It's spiritual. So I've meditated with the rock sitting on my sternum. And I imagine any rogue cancer cells being just pulled right out of me and into this rock. I hold it in my hand, my left hand, and I imagine any rogue cancer cells traveling from my lymph nodes down through my arm and into the rock. Like I have given this rock so much power to help me heal. And is it complete woo woo? I don't know. Like you could say it is, but it means so much to me. It gets me out of bed in the morning. It gets me feeling like I'm a part of this process. And I think that the more that we can empower people who are, especially cancer, because it's the drugs really, I mean, a lot of people feel bad and then they find out they have cancer. But in my case, I just felt a lump and I was like, oh, I don't know. So I need to get that checked out. And then it's like, whoa. And then the drugs make you so sick, right? So you like become this sick person that is a shell of what you feel like you used to be before, and you're bald and you got no eyelashes and no hair, and you know what I
Still
mean? You're
look
just like,
beautiful.
thank you. And anyway, so that is a perfect example to me of my own ability to heal myself and then to use the power of community. I have asked for so much prayer. I am not kidding you. And I believe that there are thousands of people all over the world praying for me. I've been added to so many prayer lists. People have been sending so much positive energy my way. And I think, and that's another one of my pillars is ask for help.
Yeah.
Learning how to really humble yourself to say, I really can't keep doing this anymore on my own. I really need your help. And also, I know I am not a burden. I could never be a burden. I think especially for women out there, like we are never a burden. Other people want to help us so much, but most people need to be asked for help because a lot of people don't know what to do. And so if those of us who need it are willing to ask for it, then I promise you will receive it. I have received so much help. There's no way I could have gotten through Poppy's death without the help of my community. And there's no way I could have gotten through this cancer treatment without the help of community. So I just encourage anyone listening to this right now, like if you need help, your community wants to help you.
I love that. And I'm actually going to say, let's make that our parting message because I could talk to you for 3 hours, but they probably won't listen for 3 hours.
No, they won't.
Straight. So I think it's a good point to stop on because I do think it's a good message because we are, as women especially, so busy people pleasing most of the time that we forget to take time for ourselves or to ask for help.
Yes.
So good message.
Yes.
I cannot thank you enough. I think you are so inspiring. I'm now a super fan, and I know my audience will be as well, and we'll certainly get your book. And we'll put all your links in the show notes, and also I'll send positive vibes
Thank
and
you.
prayers and all those things, whatever anybody believes in.
My heart is open to receiving. I accept all forms of prayer. All lit candles, all mantras, all of it. Send it my way. Yes. And and the beautiful thing about that, I have to say, is that the more I receive, the more I reflect, the more I can shine God's love back on everybody else. Like I have fully accepted that like one of my biggest gifts in this world is reflecting love back to others. And that even just saying that out loud makes me feel that little tender emotion of just, it is such a gift to be able to hold space with other people and help them see their own divinity, because we're all shining lights. And, I just feel really bright right now.
You are really bright, and you have a lot of messages still to give. So
Thank you.
I know you are going to be around for a very, very long time. I look forward to our next conversation with your
Me
next
too.
book.
I know. I've got to just harness this energy and stay focused on what matters, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that was a half joke, because we'll talk way before
Yeah.
that.
Okay, good. I know. I'm like, that might be in a couple of years.
That's okay. But seriously, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.